Piney was in the early days and we didn't have water?
Do
The
what?
church building, describing
Oh.
how the building looked and...
I was just thinking when you were saying that when you first went in the building, of course, none of the front was the same. No fellowship hall, no Sunday school rooms, just the building itself. And but we hadn't been there too long till my mother felt like it would be good if we had curtains at least between the classes. So they did put dark blue curtains up on those screws that have the hole in the end,
Eyelet screws.
where they could be tightened on the wires. And so, and another thing that the early church did, as far as the congregation was concerned, there was a bucket of water up front where people would go get a drink, and everybody drank out of the same bucket, same dipper. So, thought nothing about it. That was just the way it was.
Now, Jacqueline, where did they get the water? From the creek? Was there a well there? May I ask that?
As far as I know, they got it out of Farrell and Tracy's. Except that was, well, it was Farrell and Tracy's. Miss Honeycutt was still living. But she lived in the house that later was the church pastorium, and that we as a family lived in several times before my dad took a church in Florida for a year. That was later, that was in the 40s.
Did you have church during the night? I mean, I know there was no electricity
Well,
there.
one thing
was
that I
there?
thought was interesting about when we first went, they called that it part-time. And I think it was $10, maybe they were going to pay him a month, but that was to preach twice during the month, and or 2 Sundays. And so he asked them after, I guess, the second or third time, if they had other arrangements. If they didn't, he'd just as soon come on back the next Sunday. He didn't have anything else planned to do. And they said, well, we've got a woman coming. What do you want to do about that? And he said, well, you just have to let her know not to come. And so he, for the same salary, he just took it on himself, in the church agreed with him that he was full-time. And I have no idea when they ever raised his salary. My dad never preached for money. And I won't tell you the little story I remember about that because it gets in too much involved. But anyway, I was so proud of him, because even though our church at Emory Heights, where we had moved from, was the Southern Baptist Church, I don't remember if they had training union, but my dad believed in having Sunday school, preaching, training union, and preaching. And like the old song goes, twice on Sunday and once in the middle of the week. And that's what he practiced. And he thought nothing should keep you from church. If you were able to go to work, you should be able to come to church. But we had many years before we had really what I'd call a stable church. I don't remember who the earliest deacons were. I remember Mr. Bill Cross was one of them. But I do not remember who else was the deacon when Daddy first went there.
If I'll now remember, if you get out of breath, honey, or you need to pause. But in your book, you had done, Jacqueline, you and Brother Pat McGee, you were on that committee. You were the typist and the historian at large, I'm sure. Ida Mae Ebel was on this committee, and Pat McGee and Ray Langley. And you list the early deacons as, if I may share this with you,
Yes.
Andy Thomas, Ben Honeycutt, Walter Johnson, Herman Clinton, Sewell Honeycutt, Bill Cross, whom you just mentioned, Cecil Langley, Pat Uten, Leonard Langley, F.L. Farrell Honeycutt, Lonnie McGee, Fred Johnson, Everett Langley, Ira Ebel, Ray Langley, Edgar Erickson, Randall Langley, Roy Langley, and Donald Helton. Now these were the deacons serving at the church as of May the 31st in 1959 is what you have. And Brother Pat McGee was ordained to the ministry also in May of 1959.
Yes, you remember Jim would always mention on that day that he was ordained at the church, and then he married Judy and Lloyd, her daughter Judy and her husband Lloyd. I can't even think of their last name. Tell me. Cook.
Well, Jacqueline, so the early church at best was rather, I love the story about the...
I'm so glad that I did remember these early ones.
If you want
down there.
Bill Cross.
Mr. Ben Honeycutt. See, that would have been Farrell's father.
Well, well, I love the story about everybody. You had the bucket, water up front, and the dipper. So, of course, we didn't have our bathrooms and we didn't have the water fountains. Now, did you have electricity in the church? When your dad, you said Papa or Brother Mark wanted church, did you have electricity or did you have kerosene or...
We must have had kerosene because when we moved to Pawnee, we didn't have electricity, or, of course, it was many years before we had running water, and it was a long time that all our phones were wall phones that you rang, and everybody's ring with phone number with so many short and so many long rings. I used to remember what ours was, but I don't anymore.
Well, so you had outside toilets, I know.
Well, we just used what was at the school.
Yeah, Paul said your youngest brother, and I'm repeating this because there may be some watching it, and my husband and your youngest brother, Paul, said that he remembered that all the boys, they had a one-room school about 300 feet from the church. And Paul said that he followed the older boys. And of course, you know, my daddy used to say nobody made you do that. But Paul said that the big boys would make him knock on the toilet door when the girls were in there.
Yes.
And he said they'd get him to do that. And one time, Wilma Isham was in the toilet, and she said, Paul Edward, I know that's you, and when I get out of here, I'm going to wear you out. So, but Jacqueline, so they used the bathrooms or the outside toilets for the school. Would you go on and tell us how did most people get to church here in Pawnee?
Well, most of us walked. And even the ones that later had cars, everybody either had a car or they walked. We did go after the horse and buggy days. They didn't use those anymore. But the roads were in terrible shape. When it rained, there were several places that you could not get across. One place was down there close to where Brother Woody Tompkins lives now, where the creek crosses the road. There was just a wide stream, and when the water would be up, it was too deep to cross there. And another place that was really, really bad was between where Farrell Honeycutt lived, where Doug lives now, and the church. There were no houses in there like they are now. But down closer to the curve down there, just before you turn to go into the church lot, the road would be so muddy that people would get stuck. There were no culverts, no road upkeep like we have today. So
you're saying there were the two-story house where you lived and where Tracy and Farrell Honeycutt lived. I mean,
it was already there.
But there were no houses as there are now where,
No.
from Kay and Tim Johnson and Lonnie and,
Well, where Edward Ray lives now, in that beautiful new brick house, his mother and daddy lived there. In the 40s, I know.
how about getting to Lori's?
Well, you went down that hill.
We'll let her,